Well, hello everyone. I'm meteorologist Jake Lambright, a local television meteorologist, and today we are going to talk about the viral social media posts that have been going around about our next potential Arctic blast and snow on February 6th. Now, if you're looking for a very short, brief explanation about is this going to happen or not, this is not the place for that. I do have a post over on my Facebook page, which you can find by searching my name, Jake Lambright, if you want a quick answer to that. I posted that about 3 days ago. What we're going to do here is we're not only going to talk about what that model image showed, but we're also going to talk about how likely this is. We're going to break things down into our teleconnections, which our teleconnections are our more significant relationships between different weather phenomena. We'll go in a little more in depth than that here in just a moment. We'll also take a look at our jet stream, our placement on our jet stream, and also the placement and location on our troughs and ridges as we go through that February 6th-ish time frame. And then last but not least, really focusing in on Louisiana here. With what data we have now, what does this tell us about what things could look like around February 5th through the 10th. So first off, let's talk about teleconnections. You may have never even heard about what a teleconnection is, so I want to break that down for you. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, teleconnections are significant relationships or links between weather phenomena at widely separated locations on Earth, which typically entail climate patterns that span over thousands of miles. So in other words, with teleconnections, we're looking at how global patterns are fluctuating, not so much local or more local weather patterns like our synoptic scale. Again, we're looking at things on a much larger scale that could have an impact on us locally. So with that being said, let's talk about three of the main teleconnections that I want to look at today. Again, the three that you're looking at here on the screen, this is actually a National Weather Service website, include the Arctic Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation, and the Pacific North American Pattern, or PNA. The North Atlantic Oscillation can also be referred to as NAO, and the Arctic Oscillation can be referred to as AO for short. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a graph of the Arctic Oscillation that's been observed, and then the GFS, or the American Model Forecast, for the Arctic Oscillation there with the dashed line. Same applies here for the NAO and the PNA, or the Pacific North American Pattern. So let's talk about how this has been trending so far and what the positive and negative phases of these do depict. So first and foremost, let's talk about the Arctic Oscillation. You can see the definition here, I'm going to highlight it, but the Arctic Oscillation refers to an atmospheric circulation pattern over the mid to high latitudes of the northern hemisphere. This phase of this oscillation is most evident in the north to south location of the storm steering mid-latitude jet stream. And again, the temperature and precipitation patterns most certainly affected by the Arctic Oscillation. In other words, to make this all short for you, it's a good indicator for if Arctic air could start moving to the south. Whenever we see a negative Arctic Oscillation phase, or basically whenever you see these lines here start to drop below that zero line there, that can allow for Arctic air to escape and start to move southward. So you do see here earlier in the year, around the 5th or so, there was a really, we're down to almost -4, so that Arctic Oscillation was in that negative phase. We saw it go positive once again, and then about the end of last weekend and beginning of this week, we did see the Arctic Oscillation go back into that negative phase. We certainly did see Arctic air escape southward about that same time, and then as we've seen throughout the week, at least here in Louisiana, temperatures have warmed back up. We're back globally in that positive phase of the Arctic Oscillation. And you will notice it starts to go down and kind of fluctuates a little bit as we go throughout the next 10 days or so, 10 to 14 days. But the Arctic Oscillation itself never actually goes back into its negative phase. We'll actually take a look here at it from the European models you can see here on my screen. Even the European model also shows it dipping some, especially as we head towards probably the 5th to the 10th, but it never quite goes negative. So just something to keep in mind. Now, this is one oscillation. This is one teleconnection, so it doesn't mean everything. What does the North Atlantic Oscillation, or the NAO, show? What does it show us? Well, the North Atlantic Oscillation Index is based on the surface sea level pressure difference between the subtropical high and the subpolar low. So the National Weather Service says here below normal heights and pressure across the high latitudes of the North Atlantic with above normal heights and pressure over the central North Atlantic and eastern United States. And yes, that would mean above normal heights for us here in Louisiana as well. What this doesn't quite mention here, and I want to elaborate on this further, when we're talking about, again, a positive phase, for example, means above normal heights and pressure for us here in Louisiana. Heights and pressure are correlated with temperature. So when we see higher heights, we see warmer temperatures. When we see lower heights, we see cooler temperatures. So again, above normal heights and pressure would generally indicate above average temperatures, which seasonally run, at least in central Louisiana here, in the lower 60s for highs and lower 40s for those overnight lows. The negative phase basically just means the opposite of what I said. So for us here in Louisiana, that would mean the potential for below average temperatures. So looking back at the NAO, or North Atlantic Oscillation, you will see here as we go, this is a few weeks ago, or about a week ago, January 17th, we were in that positive phase. Then by last weekend, we started dipping down into the negative NAO phase. We certainly saw below average temperatures. Again, we had the snow there at the beginning of the week. And as we've gone throughout the week, we've seen that NAO phase go positive, just barely, but back positive once again. It's expected to kind of continue. Again, the American model showing it continuing on that positive trend through about the second, and then it starts dipping back into the negative phase in about a week from now, so next Saturday. So again, the NAO here, it's different from the Arctic oscillations, hinting, maybe some below average temperatures returning, but similar to what I said with the Arctic oscillation, can't look at that one and it guarantees us below average temperatures per se. Last but not least, let's talk a little bit about the Pacific North American pattern, or PNA. According to the National Weather Service, the PNA pattern is a prominent mode of low frequency variability in the northern hemisphere extratropics, occurring in all months except for June and July. The PNA index is measured by height anomalies, or basically how far above or below average the heights in our atmosphere are compared to average over the western and eastern United States. Whenever it comes to El Nino, La Nina, the ENSO connections, it mentions here, positive PNA patterns often align with El Nino events, while negative PNA phases are typically associated with La Ninas. Now, I know that definition might not mean a lot, so let me just break it down into a more simpler form for you. The Pacific North American pattern affects the position of the jet stream in the eastern Pacific to Alaska and down through the western coast. So in other words, a negative PNA can allow for colder air to move into Alaska in the western states and warmer air in the east. And we're really kind of split right between the middle of that. So, depending on exactly how strong in the positive or negative direction things are depends on whether or not we could see above or below average temperature. So really the PNA here has stayed positive over, really the last month or so at least, but it'll go a little bit further up according to the American model forecast. And then after that, we start to see it dip back into that negative phase around the 5th or so, and then continue until about the 8th or 9th, and then start to slowly take that positive trend up once again. So we'll also take a look at that here from the European model as well. Again, showing that downward trend, and then it's slowly starting to uptick, get a little closer to that zero line once we get a little closer to the 9th and 10th of the month. So like I mentioned, the PNA, the NAO, the Arctic oscillation, isn't everything. There are a lot of other factors that are at play here. So now that we've talked about that, let's talk a little bit more about our jet stream location, what that means for our weather patterns, and we'll also take a look at the locations of our troughs and ridges. So we'll take a look at things here with the American model first. We're taking a look at the 300 millibar level, and as we call it, this is what we use to kind of see where that jet stream is. And again, most interested, again, that model image was showing February 6th. So we're going to start a little bit before then and kind of take a look at things together beyond that point. You'll see here the jet stream there dipping pretty far to the south. So that axis there moving through areas like Nevada and back into Colorado. The further south the jet stream dips, that's when we see more active weather here in the south. So definitely seeing that jet stream a little further to the south as we go into really that 5th to 10th time frame. Then it starts lifting up a little bit more as we get closer to the 9th to 10th of the month, keeping that more active weather just a little bit more to our north. The European model, on the other hand, we'll go ahead and put that in a forecast loop and kind of compare it back to back with what we just looked at with the GFS or the American model before taking things down a level so we can see where those troughs and ridges are setting up, or in other words, those areas of high and low pressure. So now we have our European model. Let's go ahead and fast forward again back to around the 5th. That's kind of where I want to start things off. Again, we can see that jet stream looking a little more pronounced, but definitely dipping down there into the south, which again typically means a more active weather pattern across the southern states. We'll continue to see that jet stream evolve. And then I really want to see what it does once again once we head to about the 8th to 9th of the month. So it's showing it a little further south in the GFS, but does show it slowly retreating back a little bit more towards the north. Now let's go back to the American model. We'll look at what we call our 500 millibar level, which is where we kind of look at high and low pressure centers in the placement of our overall troughs and ridges. So here we are, the American model, or the GFS model. You'll notice here, let's go back to about the 5th or so. And here's where things look a little bit interesting. So we have some ridging there setting up over Alaska. And originally when I was looking at this just a few days ago, it did look like that ridging pattern would set up and kind of hold place over Alaska, meaning that we would have some colder air kind of funneling down. But whenever we start progressing that forward a little bit more towards the 6th, yes, we do have some troughing and ridging. You'll see that area of low pressure there starting to move into California. But once again, not saying that area of low pressure dipped down as far south enough to really start to impact us in Louisiana, at least with the American model. But let's go ahead and see what the European model has to say about this again. We'll fast forward to that February 5th timeframe, give or take. That ridge is actually placed a little bit back more towards the west of Alaska. We have a trough there that'll be moving through. According to this, if this all pans out, which this far out it probably will not, but again, if this were to verify or come true, we would have an area of low pressure there moving through areas like Nevada. That would slowly start to move eastward. We've got another trough moving through Nevada, again, about that 8th to 9th time frame. Maybe here, if the European model is the solution that we see verify, we do see some impacts, at least in northern portions of the state, that trough axis right there. And kind of that's where you'd find that area of low pressure as that system starts to swing through. But again, it's just not dipping as far to the south. There was one thing that I forgot to mention when it came to our jet stream, and I'll just use one model as an example since it'll take a second for that to load back in. But I kind of want to illustrate what we can see when the polar jet stream does dip to the south. So let's go back, let's get that ridge in Alaska there so I can show you what this means as far as cool air goes. So when you see these lines here, these black lines across the whole map, those represent lines of, well, in this case, it represents lines of constant height. These can, depending on the map that you look at, also represent lines of constant pressure. And we see the winds blow in the direction in between these lines. So for example, let me find a big gap. Right here, you would see winds blowing from north to south, and then as those lines start to curve with that trough, you'll see the winds start to blow, in this case, from kind of more west to the east or to the northeast. So again, kind of to illustrate this for you, that ridging there that's setting up over Alaska would help to send cool air down kind of along this trajectory, if that makes sense. So if we were to see this, that coolest of the air even wouldn't quite reach us likely in Louisiana. And we'll get to that a little bit more here in just a second. And I can kind of illustrate to you that picture. As things stand now with how things look, that the coolest of that air would stay to our north and not quite make it as far to the south. So now we've taken a look at our jet stream. We've taken a look at where our troughs and ridges could set up and how that could impact us a little bit as well. Again, want to go more in depth and analyze this, but don't want to go too far in depth. So $1,000,000 question, that 5th through 10th time frame, what could that mean as far as temperatures are concerned here in Louisiana? Let's actually take a more zoomed in view. It's going to take just a second for that to get loaded, but what could that look like? That one European model that was a viral image, I know that the colors looked scary, but that was showing mid and upper 20s at 6 a.m., which is cold, but it's also overnight in the winter, not a big shock. We'll go forward again. Let's start things off with the 5th, Wednesday, February 5th at 6 a.m. We have, again, state of Louisiana is really what I'm focusing on here. We have temperatures in the upper 30s along I-20, 40s in central Louisiana, even 60s there in the New Orleans area and along the southeastern coast. Let's see how this evolves. As we go into Wednesday afternoon, temperatures just don't change much. We see that cooler air again immediately to our north, but just not quite dipping down as far south as I'd like. Wednesday or Thursday afternoon on the 6th, not seeing much in the way of Arctic air. Sure, these temperatures are below average for highs. During the overnight hours, they just don't fluctuate much. This is 6 a.m. the next morning, Friday afternoon. Well, again, staying below average for those high temperatures, but I mean, overnight, we're just not seeing super cool temperatures. By the weekend, we're back in the 60s. This will change. I mean, this is not what's going to hold together. And then, of course, that model is hinting at maybe some of that cooler air, trying to make it back further to the south. Again, right now, anything I'm showing you really has to be taken with a grain of salt. But again, I'm trying to show you the teleconnections, the locations of our jet stream, and help that click with what we do look at when we attempt to forecast long range. I mean, I know people say the joke all the time. I think it's hilarious myself, but we get paid to be wrong half the time. And that's 7 to 10 days out. So again, things like this do have to be taken with a grain of salt. So we've looked at the American model, what it thinks might happen around that 5th to the 10th time frame as far as temperatures go. Well, what does the European model show during that same time period? So it's going to take just a second there to load up, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at what to expect. Well, it's going a little more warmer as we head towards the 5th. Again, this is 6 a.m. Wednesday, February 5th. We got some 50s and 60s. Honestly, we are in the winter. It wouldn't shock me to see the American model be the more realistic scenario, but like I said, both of these have to be taken with a grain of salt this far out. Mid 70s there. We're far from any Arctic air on, now we're in the morning of February 6th, where we allegedly had that big mega Arctic blast and snowstorm. I hate to break it to you, 40s, 60s, anything 38 degrees or higher for sure. I just don't see that being conducive for snow, unless you've got a snow machine maybe. Then that afternoon, we've got some mid-upper 70s, low 70s according to the European model. The overnight hours of February 6th into Friday morning, February 7th, we're still looking at 60s. Still looking at 60s in the afternoon, and just seeing those warmer temperatures overall. You will see that cooler air, like I mentioned, up to our north based on kind of the reasoning that I explained with the not just with our teleconnections, but the placement of our jet stream and that bringing cooler air down and keeping that a little further to our north. This here is kind of backing me up on that and keeping temperatures warmer. Similarly, though, the European model's hinting at some cooler air moving in closer to the 10th. But like I said, this just has to be taken with a grain of salt. Ultimately, you know, big Arctic blast and snow January or February 6th, probably not going to happen based on what we're seeing now. That being said, though, with these models being so far out, a lot can change. We might end up seeing cooler temperatures on February 6th, but it's just a reminder to just not buy into the hype that you see online. So ultimately, this might become a series, but hype or fact, Arctic air, Arctic blast on February 6th, and the snow, ultimately, it's all hype. There's just not much fact for us here in Louisiana. Now, obviously, it's winter. We're going to see temperatures below freezing again at some point, and when we do, we're going to be paying pretty close attention to that forecast, and, you know, maybe not here with the YouTube video every time, but you can certainly count on me keeping you informed on other social media platforms as there's any kind of truth or confidence in that. What I like to do and kind of what I just showed you here as a meteorologist, my forecasting process, is what we all do. I just showed you 2 models here, but we look at all the models. We look at all the data available to us. We look at the teleconnections. We look at those global patterns. We look at things on a much larger scale, and we compare. That one model image that went viral that I showed you at the beginning of the video, that was one model image that was in one update. And then after that, we just didn't see those temperatures once again. And even so, I mean, yeah, those temperatures were below freezing. But, you know, every time we see below freezing temperatures in Louisiana, that's not a big mega Arctic blast that's going to bring snow into the area. There was a New Orleans meteorologist that said it best on Facebook the other day. It took 130 years to see that historic snow in New Orleans. It's probably not going to happen again on February 6th. So again, hyper fact with this, it's all hype for now. That could change, and if it does, as always, I'll keep you posted on other social media platforms. If you want to see more like this, let me know, whether that's in the YouTube comments, maybe you don't have a YouTube account, let me know on Facebook, and I'll see about doing more content like this in the future. So I do thank you for watching, especially if you watched all the way through. I know this has been a bit of a lengthy video, about 20 minutes. But I do enjoy sharing this in-depth analysis with you. And if there's anything in the future that I could do too to make this easier and simpler to understand, I am all ears, ready to take feedback from you. So thank you for joining me for this video today, and I'll catch you in the next one.